0612 local time, Southern Caribbean Sea. The morning was the kind that Coast Guardsmen know well. Low sun cutting sideways across flat water, visibility already pushing 15 miles, the kind of conditions where you see everything and everything sees you. USCGC Monroe had been on patrol track for 9 hours, the crew into the quiet efficiency of a watch that had produced nothing yet. Then the radar picture changed. A surface contact materialized at bearing 203, range 38 nautical miles. Speed 18 knots and climbing. No AIS transmission, no navigation lights, no response to the automated contact request the system fires the moment an unidentified contact appears within sensor range. The operations officer pulled up the radar return and studied it. The contact's track ran northwest across open water on a heading that pointed away from any port, any fishing ground, any logical destination for a legitimate vessel making 18 knots before 700. "It's running," she said. That was all she needed to say. The contact accelerated to 22 knots. The track resolved into a characteristic radar cross-section. Low freeboard, narrow beam, the density return of a steel-hulled vessel carrying significant mass below its waterline. A profile that the Coast Guard's Caribbean Patrol database associates with a specific category of smuggling platform. Purpose-built transshipment vessels designed to cover long distances quickly while presenting the smallest possible radar signature. The contact was logged as Sierra 1, and the Monroe began building its intercept solution. Then the second contact appeared, bearing 156, range 44 nautical miles, speed 24 knots. Radar cross-section considerably larger than Sierra 1. Dense return, sharp bow wave in the Doppler data. The ESM console resolved its radar emission profile against the database before the optical systems had time to produce a visual identification. Venezuelan Navy. Guaycari-class patrol vessel. The classification came back in under 90 seconds. The tactical display now showed 3 icons: the Monroe, Sierra 1, and the Venezuelan Warship, all on vectors that were tightening toward a common area of sea. Not immediately, not dramatically, but with a mathematical certainty that the plotting display made visible. All 3 would converge within the same patch of ocean in approximately 14 minutes, if none altered course. The commanding officer arrived on the bridge and absorbed the picture without speaking for a moment. Then, that's not independent navigation. He didn't elaborate, he didn't need to. A Venezuelan Navy patrol vessel appearing at speed on a direct closing course to a known drug interdiction area, at the same moment a tracked smuggling contact was running through, it required an explanation. And the explanation that fit the geometry was that the Venezuelan ship knew the Monroe was working a contact and had decided to insert itself into the operation. This had happened before. Venezuelan naval vessels had been shadowing Coast Guard operations in the Southern Caribbean with increasing regularity following a series of interdictions that Caracas had publicly characterized as violations of Venezuelan sovereignty despite occurring in international waters. The pattern was documented. The intent from the Venezuelan side was to apply friction to American law enforcement operations, to make every interdiction a diplomatic complication, to create footage of Venezuelan warships confronting American vessels, to raise the operational cost of counter-narcotics patrol until the calculation changed. The Monroe's mission was to interdict Sierra 1. That mission had not changed because a second vessel had appeared on the display. "Launch the Dolphin," the captain ordered. "RHIB to standby. Maintain course." On the flight deck, the MH-65 Dolphin helicopter rolled into position. Blades unfolded. The pre-launch checklist ran at the pace of a crew that had executed it enough times to have stripped every unnecessary motion from the sequence. The rotors reached operating speed. The helicopter lifted at 0623, climbing to observation altitude and banking toward Sierra 1's track, while its sensor turret oriented toward the Venezuelan contact simultaneously. The Dolphin crew had 2 jobs from the moment they left the deck: maintain continuous sensor coverage on the smuggling target and maintain continuous sensor coverage on the Venezuelan warship. Both feeds streamed back to the Monroe's CIC in real time. Standard hails went out to the Venezuelan contact on bridge-to-bridge and the international distress frequency. United States Coast Guard cutter Monroe operating in international waters. Venezuelan naval vessel, you are closing at high speed on an active law enforcement operation. State your intentions. No response. A second call, repeated in Spanish. the Venezuelan ship's speed increased to 26 knots. At 0631, the RHIB went into the water. 6 boarding officers, cameras running on every one of them. The over-the-horizon boat pushing towards Sierra 1 at full power, while the Dolphin maintained its sensor orbit above. The smuggling contact had been turning intermittently, running through a series of course changes that suggested its crew was aware of both the cutter and the incoming Venezuelan vessel, and was trying to use the confusion between them as cover. The RHIB's approach geometry was calculated to close that option, arcing wide to cut off the northern escape vector, while the Dolphin held the southern one. The Venezuelan patrol ship was now at 1,400 yards off the Monroe's starboard quarter, maintaining a parallel course that matched the cutter's speed within a fraction of a knot. Its forward gun mount was trained to centerline, not aimed, not elevated toward any target, positioned in the specific way that communicates readiness without constituting a hostile act. Its bridge wing was active with crew. Its search radar was running at elevated power. The ESM console logged the radar emission profile. Surface search band, not fire control. The distinction was noted and recorded. Inside the CIC, the watch team was operating 2 tracks simultaneously. Sierra 1's approach status updated every few seconds as the RHIB closed the distance. The Venezuelan vessel's bearing, range, and behavior logged with the same timestamp precision. Every radar emission, every course adjustment, every speed change, every second of silence on the radio frequencies where it should have been responding. At 0638, the RHIB made contact with Sierra 1. Boarding hooks over the rail, engines cut. The target vessel's crew had been in the process of an evidence dump. Packages visible in the water astern, the characteristic white spray of bales hitting the surface at speed. But the RHIB had closed faster than the dump could complete. The boarding team secured the hull without resistance. The crew of 3 was detained immediately. Cargo confirmed. Multiple bales. Radar has them consistent with prior seizures. The RHIB lead reported. Probable cocaine. Significant quantity. Copy, the Monroe replied. Maintain chain of custody. Document everything before you move anything. The Venezuelan patrol ship had not withdrawn. At 0641, it had closed to 800 yards off the Monroe's starboard beam. Its searchlights came on in the middle of a cloudless morning. Not for illumination, which the conditions made unnecessary, but for visibility. A display of presence. The lights swept across the water between the 2 vessels in a deliberate arc. The crew along the rails was visible through binoculars, helmets, body armor, a posture that communicated alertness without constituting provocation. The captain did not change course. The Monroe held its track, maintaining the station-keeping relationship to the RHIB that the boarding operation required. The Dolphin adjusted its orbit to place itself between the 2 surface vessels, maintaining an altitude and position that gave its sensor turret direct line of sight to the Venezuelan ship's bridge and deck simultaneously. The optical feed in the CIC showed Venezuelan crew members watching the helicopter through binoculars. They were being observing. The captain's instruction to his bridge team was the same instruction it had been since the Venezuelan contact first appeared. Hold course, record everything, respond to nothing that doesn't require response. Restraint in this context is not passivity. It is a specific operational choice with specific logic. A Coast Guard cutter that alters its behavior in response to a foreign Navy vessel shadowing its operations has validated the shadowing as an effective tactic. It is confirmed that the presence of a Venezuelan warship changes what American law enforcement does in international waters. That confirmation is the product the Venezuelan operation is designed to extract, and once extracted, it cannot be returned. It becomes the basis for the next operation, and the next, with the pressure incrementally increased each time. The Monroe gave the operation nothing to extract. At 0647, the Dolphin transmitted on the international frequency. Venezuelan naval vessel. This is a United States Coast Guard helicopter. You are operating in proximity to an active law enforcement operation in international waters. Your position and behavior are being continuously recorded. Maintain safe distance. The transmission was made once in English and once in Spanish. The Venezuelan ship did not respond verbally. Its speed dropped by 1 knot, then by another. The parallel track that had been maintained with the Monroe's speed began to diverge slightly. Not a turn, not a withdrawal, a relaxation of the precise course matching that had characterized the previous 16 minutes. On the Dolphin's optical feed, the forward gun mount rotated back to its stowed centerline position. The RHIB was completing its initial evidence documentation aboard Sierra 1. Every bale photographed before touching, every surface swabbed and bagged before the bale was moved. Timestamps on every action, cross-referenced against the Monroe's navigation log for the precise coordinates of the seizure. Chain of custody begins at the moment of discovery, not at the moment of transfer, and the chain the boarding team was building would survive any subsequent legal challenge precisely because they had executed it this way. Cargo count, 19 bales. Estimated combined weight consistent with approximately 0.9 metric tons, the RHIB lead reported. Evidence secured, ready for transfer. The Venezuelan patrol ship was at 1,100 yards and its rate of closure had reversed. It was opening. By 0659, it was at 1,400 yards and still moving outward. By 0708, it was past 2 nautical miles and no longer maintaining any geometric relationship to the Monroe's position. Its speed had reduced to a normal patrol cruise. The searchlights were off. The crew along the rails had moved inside. The Dolphin completed its final orbit and returned to the Monroe's flight deck. The RHIB came up the cradle at 0714, boarding officers dripping from spray, evidence crates stacked and sealed, every face carrying the specific combination of physical exhaustion and functional attention that a successful boarding at sea produces. The detained crew was transferred to the Monroe's custody in the prescribed order, each step recorded. By 0722, the Venezuelan patrol ship was 11 nautical miles out, and its track showed no indication of return. It would remain on the Monroe's radar picture for another 40 minutes before passing below detection threshold. The record the Monroe had produced was complete. RHIB launch and recovery times, both timestamped to the second. Full sensor coverage of the smuggling interdiction from Sierra 1's first detection through the boarding team's cargo count and evidence packaging. ESM logs of every radar emission the Venezuelan vessel had produced during the encounter. The elevated power surface search radar that had spiked at 0638 and tapered off after the Dolphin's transmission. The specific emission profile that would update the electronic order of battle database entry for the Guaycurí class. Optical and infrared footage from the Dolphin covering both the RHIB's approach to Sierra 1 and the Venezuelan warship's approach, parallel shadowing and withdrawal. Audio logs of every hail attempt, every second of unanswered silence, and the Dolphin's single transmission that had preceded the Venezuelan ship's disengagement. The cocaine evidence would support a federal prosecution. The tactical record would support a different kind of case. The documented behavioral signature of Venezuelan naval gray zone interference with American law enforcement operations in international waters. In Washington, the footage and the electronic logs had reached the relevant agencies before the Monroe's morning watch had ended. The pattern it confirmed, Venezuelan warships inserting into active Coast Guard operations, using proximity and display without crossing the explicit thresholds that would require kinetic response, was not new. What the Monroe's record added was another data point in the accumulating file, another precisely documented instance with timestamps and sensor cross-references that could not be argued away by competing narrative. For Caracas, the morning had produced a specific outcome. The interdiction had succeeded. The evidence was secured. The footage that Washington held showed a Venezuelan warship approaching, shadowing, displaying, and withdrawing without having altered the operation's result by a single frame. The footage that Caracas held showed a Venezuelan warship that had approached an American cutter, held position for 26 minutes, and then moved away after a helicopter transmission. Neither set of footage supported a Venezuelan narrative of effective intervention. Both sets documented American restraint under deliberate provocation. The Monroe resumed her patrol track at 0731. The Caribbean was unremarkable ahead. The crew completed their post-boarding procedures. The evidence room logged and sealed. The detained crew processed according to the applicable law. The RHIB stowed and prepped for the next launch, which might come in an hour or might come in 3 days. What the morning had demonstrated was not complicated. A single cutter with one helicopter and one RHIB had conducted a successful narcotics interdiction in the presence of a foreign military vessel attempting to interfere with the operation, without altering course, without escalating, without providing the reaction the Venezuelan presence had been designed to elicit, and without compromising a single link in the evidentiary chain that would eventually support the prosecution of the boarding's results. The Monroe hadn't done this by being more powerful than the Venezuelan warship, though its network connectivity made it far more capable than its hull suggested. It had done it by being more patient, more methodical, and more committed to procedure than the situation's pressure was designed to tolerate. In the gray zone, the side that controls the record controls the encounter's meaning long after the vessels have separated. The Monroe controlled the record. The sea was calm. The horizon was clear. The engines settled back into their patrol rhythm. If this breakdown gave you a precise understanding of how Coast Guard law enforcement operations function under foreign military interference, and why procedural discipline paired with continuous documentation defeats gray zone pressure tactics on their own terms, share it and subscribe. The interdictions that happen under a watching foreign warship are the ones that test whether restraint is a policy or just a phrase.